All right, this shiur is called A Joke Before Shiur, the Role of Humor in Torah Study. And I think the appropriate thing to do would be to make a joke to start off shiur. But the thing is that like at the very beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was depressed, then Shalhavet actually hired a comedian to do a comedy show for the faculty and like their families. And it was the most awkward thing ever because I think he was funny, but because everyone was on mute, then like the jokes felt like they fell flat on their face. And then I think at one point a couple people turned off their mute, and then it felt like they were artificially laughing. And I feel like it would be such an awkward like note to start on that I don't want to even like risk it by starting a joke. So if we were in person, I would tell you a joke. So pretend I said a joke. And if this counts as that, then like good. Okay, so we'll just get right into the shiur. So today's objectives are a lot looser than I usually have. We're going to analyze one statement in the Gemara about the role that joy, humor, and jokes should play in learning. And then we're going to try to gain some insight into practical applications, like just to translate it into practice for, how we should relate to learning, or if you're giving shiur, then how you should relate to jokes and stuff. A few disclaimers. Number one, this is not psak, even though we are doing a halachic thing, but I did not explore the psak dimension of this. So like, don't translate this into action halachically. Two, this is not a comprehensive overview of the subject, meaning that this is a very, very broad topic. And I haven't gone through all the Gemaras. And I'm also I haven't even analyzed all the views that we're going to mention. Treat this as like an overview. And then the other thing is, this is Machshavah Lab, right? So we're just like exploring together, and this is more of an exploratory shiur than a like presenting a full thing. Okay, so those are the disclaimers. Okay, so our shiur is going to center on a Gemara that is about two contradictory psukim in Koheles. I'm pretty sure we went over this when we did, those of you who learned Koheles with me, that Chazal wanted to take Koheles out of circulation from Tanakh because it contradicted itself. That's one of the reasons given. So this is an example. So Shlomo Melech in the second parak says, "Amarti ani belivi lachana anasacha v'simcha u're'eh v'tov v'hine gam hu havel." So I said in my heart, "Come, let us experiment with joy and have a good time." And behold, this too was futile. L'schok amarti meholal, about laughter, I said this is insanity or madness. U'lesimcha maza osa. And about simcha, about joy or rejoicing or like mirth, I said, what does this accomplish? So this is a negative statement about simcha. Okay, but then in chapter 8, he says, sorry, that should say chapter 8, not chapter 5. Chapter 8, he says, V'shibachti ani asa simcha. I praised joy. Asher ein tov la'adam tachas hashemesh ki im la'achol v'lishtot v'lismoch v'hu yilvenu b'malo yimei chayav asher nasan lo ha'elokim tachas hashemesh. That I praised joy because man has no other good under the sun except to eat, drink, have joy, and that will accompany him in his toil during the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. So he's praising simcha. Sorry, he's condemning simcha, and then he's praising simcha. So the question is like, how do you resolve the contradiction? So that's where our Gemara comes in. And by the way, view this Gemara as like a runway landing. Okay, so like it's going to zoom in, and then we're only going to focus on the very last part intensively, but the context is important. So Gemara says like this, it resolves the contradiction by saying, V'shibati ani asa simcha, I praised joy, simcha shal mitzvah. That's only talking about a mitzvah-related joy. U'lesimcha maza osa, but when he says, what does joy accomplish? That's zo simcha she'ena shal mitzvah. That is a non-simcha mitzvah, non-mitzvah simcha, okay? Again, feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. I feel like we haven't been entirely on Zoom in a very long time, so I don't know if we've forgotten how it goes. Okay, so now the Gemara extrapolates a lesson from this. I'm just going to read in English here. The praise of joy mentioned here is to teach you that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests upon an individual, neither from an atmosphere of sadness, nor of laziness, nor of laughter, nor of frivolity, nor of idle conversation, nor of idle chatter, but rather from the joy of the mitzvah. Now, when it says Shekhinah in this context, it means nevuah, okay, or it means Ruach HaKodesh. And I know that because this is in the Gemaras that are dealing with Halal, okay? And it's talking about when David and Melech got Ruach HaKodesh and when he didn't, and it's saying basically you can't get Ruach HaKodesh or Nevuah unless you're in a spirit of Simcha. And then the Rambam actually paskins this way and says that a Navi can't get Nevuah. I don't think it's just the Rambam, but a Navi can't get Nevuah unless they're happy, okay? Oh, by the way, I should mention just this Gemara is found in two places, at least. It's in Shabbos Daf Lamed Amud Beis, which is the one I'm quoting from, and then slightly different version in Psachim Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. So that's the Gemara we're doing. Okay, but then here's the part. Here's landing some more into our sugya. Amar Rav Yehuda v'chein lidavar halacha. So too, regarding a matter of halacha, meaning when it comes to a matter of halacha, you should be in a state of simcha and not in a state of atzvus, sadness, atzlus, laziness, schok, laughing, kalus rosh, frivolity, sicha, mundane chatter, devarim petelim, idle matters, but rather a simcha or simcha shel mitzvah. Okay, so that's the statement. Now, you might think when it says ledavar halacha, it means when you're about to like fulfill a halacha, but it's pretty clear from the Gemara that it's talking about learning halacha. Okay, so based on this, it's saying you should be happy when you learn halacha. But now the Gemara raises a contradiction. Eini, is that true? V'amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav. Rav Gidol said in the name of Rav, Kol Talmid Chacham sheyoshev lifnei Rabo ve'ein sifsosav notvos mar kikavena. Any student who sits in front of his teacher and his lips don't drip with bitterness, okay, we'll explain what that means in a second, should be burnt. And Rashi there says bitterness of trepidation, of fear on account of his Rebbe. So in other words, if you're sitting in front of your Rebbe and your lips are not dripping with bitterness, then you should be burnt. Okay, now before we go on, when I read this, I was like, what does it mean dripping with bitterness? Like, that's a weird idiom, you know? Does anything come to mind? Because I was going over this with my Talmidim in yeshiva, and we couldn't figure it out last night. And then this morning I had an epiphany, and I realized what it meant. So just like, what's your impression of like lips dripping with bitterness being connected with fear?
Maybe it gives the imagery of melting, like melting in fear.
Oh, that's good. That's I can definitely see that being the case. And the Tanakh itself uses that by talking about like the melting of the heart out of fear, you know. So I did what anyone should do is I Googled fear and bitter and lips, okay, and I found a Healthline article called "Can Anxiety Cause a Metallic Taste in Your Mouth?" Anxiety can cause a host of reactions in your body. This is an excerpt from the article. Fast heart rate, shallow breathing, flushed skin, and blood pressure spikes are some of the more common stress reactions. One of the lesser known responses is a change in the taste in your mouth. For some people, anxiety dries out the mouth, leaving behind a bitter or metallic taste. The medical name for this is dysgeusia. Researchers don't yet know exactly why the metallic taste appears. It may be because anxiety can cause your mouth to dry out and the reduced flow of saliva causes bitterness or metallic taste. Have any of you experienced this? I can't say I experience it as like a normal reaction, but there have been times I know where like, it's usually when I realize that I forgot something very important, or like something like we have a realization, like a sinking realization, there's like a metallic taste, you know, or let's say like you're taking a test and you realize that like something was on the test that you didn't study for, that you were supposed to study for. So I think that's what it means, is that your mouth is dripping with bitterness, because there is a phenomenon of when you're in a state of fear and anxiety, you have a bitter taste in your mouth. Okay. And the Gemara gives a weird proof, and I'm doing the quotation marks proof in case you can't see, because this is not a proof. It's like an asmachta. It's like just attaching to the psukim from Shir Shirim. Shnemar, as it says, the pasuk says Shnemar, sifsosav shoshanim notvos mor over. His lips are as lilies, type of flower, dripping with flowing myrrh. Myrrh is a type of spice, and the phrase is mor over. And then the Gemara says, do not read mor over, flowing myrrh, which would be a good thing. Rather, read mar over, flowing bitterness. Likewise, do not read shoshanim, lilies, but rather shonim, people who are studying, meaning that when you're studying Torah, then your lips should be bitter. Okay, now, how is this? I mean, just to make sure that this is that we get this here, what's the contradiction that the Gemara is pointing out?
You have to be happy when you do mitzvahs. You also have to be afraid.
Right. So the first Gemara, the last Gemara said you should be happy when you're involved in learning halacha. And this one seems to be saying that if you're in front of your Rebbe, you should be in the state of fear and bitterness. Okay, so that's a contradiction. All right. So the Gemara gives two answers, and we're going to focus on the second one. So the Gemara says, Lo kasha, this is not a difficulty. Ha birabba, ha betalmid. So the Rav should be in a state of joy, but the student should be in a state of bitterness. Okay, no offense, so you got the short end of the stick there. So that's one answer, but the second answer is the one we're focusing on. The bias ema, if you want, you can say ha v'ha baraba, that both of them apply to the rav, meaning both states of joy and bitterness apply to the rav. V'lo kasha, and it's not a difficulty. Ha mikame deliftach, ha lebasar difasach. The joy is before he starts teaching, and then the trepidation and the dread is after he starts teaching. Okay, and it supports it with a practice, and this is the Gemara we're focusing on. Okay, I mean we're focusing on all of this, but this is the statement. This is the practical statement. Kiha de Rabba. So this is what Rabba would do. Mikami de pasach lehu Rabbanan. Before he started his shiur with the Rabbanan, Amar milsa de bedichusa. He would say something humorous or something a joke. Not so clear how to translate milsa de bedichusa. A joking matter, a lighthearted matter, a comical matter. Ubadchi Rabbanan, and the rabbis would laugh. Okay. Ulasof, but then afterwards, Yasif be'emasa, they would sit in awe or dread or trepidation. Upasach b'shmaita, and they would begin the learning of teaching the Torah 12 path, the received halacha. Okay, so just to put it all together here. Okay, again, we're focusing on the second answer here. Is that how do we resolve the contradiction of should you learn in joy or should you learn in a state of dread or trepidation? So it's saying before the learning starts, then you should be in a state of joy. And that's facilitated by Rabba's practice that he would make a joke at the beginning of shiur and everyone would laugh. And then they would settle into this mode of trepidation and awe and fear and bitterness. Okay. So unlike in many shiurim for Friday, we're going to do what we usually do in our week, in the middle of the week shiurim, is I'm not going to list the questions. We're going to list the questions together. Okay. So what questions can you ask on this Gemara here?
What can we learn from the story about the rabbi with his students?
Okay, so the ultimate goal is going to be, I'm going to put this as the last question, okay, which is what are the practical implications of this Gemara, okay? And by this Gemara, I mean the rabbi who made a joke, and then also this thing about like fear. And again, I'm not poskening, but the question is like this, is like, I don't know about you. I mean, actually, I do know about you because I've taught you for many years. I feel like when we learn, we laugh a lot. Like there's lots of jokes being made throughout, and like it's a very, very like lighthearted atmosphere. And I think I get that because that's how my Rebbeim taught me, like Rabbi Moskowitz, like my Mishlei Rebbe, that's how we were there also. So is this Gemara saying that like we should only do that at the beginning and then like sit in a state of like, you guys should have like a metallic taste in your mouth because you're so terrified, like what are we to make of this practically, So, and then also like there's practical questions of like, well, actually, let's break it down. Let's ask more questions on the Gemara here. And I think a lot of them will like be capped off by Leah's question about what the practical thing is. So again, what would you ask here?
I just have a practical question.
Sure.
Can you go back to the first Gemara, like where it originally says about the metallic taste?
Yeah.
So isn't it over here talking about like a student?
So it is interesting that here it's talking about a student, but at this point, for some reason, the Gemara assumes that it's talking about everyone. And the reason I know that is because the Gemara's answer, its first answer is the joy is about a Rav and the bitterness is about a student. So even though the Gemara was about a student, it sounds like it should be like an atmosphere of bitterness. And you could think about it also as like if you're, if I said a student should be in a state of like trepidation in front of the Rav, what would you imagine the Rav's demeanor should be? Probably not joking around, So I think that's why it's assuming like all around should be in a state of trepidation. And then the first answer is no, the Rav could be as happy as he wants. Students are bitter. And then second answer is no, everyone beforehand could be happy and jokey. And then in shiur, then everyone is in awe or trepidation. Yeah. So other questions?
So yeah, question is like, why would you want to be in trepidation? And like
Yes.
in trepidation and fear from what?
Okay, good. So what is the nature and purpose of this? And I'm going to use the Hebrew word ema. And you notice I'm kind of not committing to how I translate this. Ema means fear, but it also has like this implication of awe. And I think trepidation is a good word because it's not like you're afraid that the Rav's going to like punch you or something like that, but so it's not like a fear for being harmed, but trepidation is like a good, like caution, wariness, So what's the nature and purpose of this ema? That's a good question.
I start out with a joke at all.
Yes. Okay, good. That I was hoping someone would ask. Okay. If you're ultimately, so I guess let's break into two questions. Okay. Why start off with a joke? Okay. That's going to be the main question I want to answer. And all of the answers we're going to go through in the Mepharshim are addressing that. And some of them will be able to extrapolate more. So this is the main question. But then the other question, and I don't know if Gula, if this is what you were intending here when you said at all, is that if, wait, hold on a second here, which is, yeah, so why start off with a joke if you're just going to go into ema mode afterwards? Like, in other words, doesn't it cancel it out? Like it almost is like a, like we're encouraging like what's the word I'm looking for? It's like mixed, not mixed signals. Is that what they call it? Mixed messages, right? Mixed messages. It's like, hey, everyone, let's be happy and joyous, and then let's get serious. And like, if you don't, then you're gonna get burned, So it's just like it's like an emotional roller coaster, ups and downs. Like, what is that supposed to be?
I feel like,
Also-
sorry to interrupt, but I feel like this is like at a wedding or any simcha that anyone makes, it
That's
always
interesting.
like
Right.
after, so maybe it's something like that.
Okay, that's
The
a good
opposite, I don't know.
comparison. Let's keep that in mind. Meaning that there are cases in halacha where we intermingle or where we juxtapose opposite emotions, like at a wedding when we mourn Yerushalayim and then have the celebration. Right. That's a good question.
Are these seem just like natural, like fear from learning Torah, or I guess jokes is something that you do? Like, is this meant, like, how is it like commanding you in this, or is it
Okay.
a commandment? Like,
Yeah. So let's let us say what. Okay. Let's put it this way. What is the nature? No, wasn't that? Is this halacha or like midas chasidus, for lack of a better term? In other words, like, do you have to start off with a joke? Like, let's say you don't start off with a joke. Are you like doing something that's usher, or is this beyond the letter of the law? And if it's beyond the letter of the law, then as we've seen all year in Pirkei Avos, like, what are the parameters for like implementing it? Actually, the term we've been using is derech hayachid, right? Which is like beyond the letter of the law. And if the latter, what are the parameters? Yeah.
also, like, I think part of my question was that, like, yeah, to some extent you could control the environment, like during a shiur, in a room,
Yeah.
but that's also partly up to chance, just like what the people's moods are that day, and just
Right. Like what? So what if it doesn't work? Right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. What are you supposed to do? Okay, good. So let's do this just in the interest of time here. So I compiled 7 Mepharshim, but let's try to answer. Actually, let's focus on these first 3 questions here. Okay, what would you say? And I guess really the order should be. Sorry if you're taking notes and I'm messing you up here. Really should be like this, right? Why start off with a joke? What's the nature and purpose of the ema? And then why start off with joke if you're just going to go into ema mode afterwards? So what do you guys say for either of those questions?
I feel like in a story, like if you don't take it super literally, you can kind of like interpret it as like when you're in like a jokey mode or like you make a joke, you shouldn't take the joke and like extend that to like being lax in your learning and kind of like in a jokey environment, but to kind
Okay,
of
good.
like stiffen up immediately afterwards and realize like this is a serious learning environment. So being
Yeah.
able to transition well from like joke to serious.
Okay, so I like that as an answer to number 3. Okay, and a partial answer to number 2. So what Leia's saying for number 2 is learning is a serious activity in the sense that, like, what do you? This is not a question just for Leia. What makes it a serious activity? Like, serious in what sense?
important.
Or why is seriousness appropriate to that?
You need to be receptive to the learning.
Yeah, right, is that this is not, we're not just doing this for fun. We're doing this so that we learn from it, so that it impacts us, and that requires a certain like sense of purpose and mission. Okay, why else is it does it require this, like this mentality here?
And because you need to be able to think, and you sometimes, like when you're in a jokey state, you can't really think so clearly.
Right. Is that if you're too casual or jokey, then it could prevent proper thought. And the analogy I would use here for both of these things, actually, there's one more also, which I'm going to add this piece here. Actually, I'm going to convert this into a question here, which is going to reveal a fact. Okay, which is, what type of learning does this apply to? Now, the Gemara did specify. Okay, what did the Gemara say this applies to?
Halacha.
Halacha, right? And if you think about it, what's the difference between the way, and I know this is a loaded question here, okay, but picture the learning scenario back then about how the stakes were different when they learned halacha from their Rav versus when we learned halacha with our Rav. What was the major difference in terms of like?
They didn't have a book.
They didn't have a book. Exactly, right? So when we learn, what's the worst that can happen? Worst thing can happen is that you don't think carefully or you don't listen carefully and you make a mistake. Okay, what's the worst that can happen if they make a mistake?
Entire tradition gets messed up. Transmission.
Exactly. Messes up the Masorah, right? So the thing is like the analogy I would use is I would use two analogies here in terms of like the type of seriousness that we're talking about. Is if you're doing surgery, okay, in an operating room, like you don't want it to be everyone just making jokes and like being casual. Now, I'll let you know a little secret, because my dad was a doctor, is like it is far more casual than you would think, but I guess even in the very, very, like you're doing, like a neurosurgery, and it's like a critical moment, you're not going to be like cracking jokes and like, having that like sort of mood, because the seriousness, because the stakes are very high, or if you don't like that analogy, if you're diffusing a bomb and like it's ticking down, you don't just like stop to make jokes. You have to give all your attention to this thing. So I think that's a good answer.
Somehow in movies they have time to make jokes and like.
I know. So that's why I was mentioning this last night, and someone said, "Yeah, but you have to make a joke right before you cut the wire, right? Like that's always how they do it. Is they get down and then the guy looks up and is like joke and then cuts the wire, But that's in the movies. They don't do that in real life. This is a great answer for number 2, which is that the activity of learning halacha, especially at a time when Torah Bal was contingent on being Bal Peh, requires a sense of seriousness and purpose and like receptiveness, and so as to not mess up the learning. And then the other part of the answer that you gave was that it's to counteract the joke has a purpose, which we haven't talked about yet. But you have to like not let that go too far and color the entire mood through the entire thing. Is you have to like counterbalance it with the mentality that is appropriate for learning. So that was a good answer.
So,
okay, any other answers? Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to say, I think this addresses number 3 and 4.
Sure. We
attended once this seminar, which was for married couples, and they specifically wanted husband and wife to come together.
Yeah.
So, their atmosphere in the room was actually fairly serious. So the rabbi who started it off, he's like, I have to put a joke in here. And he basically said, I have to put a joke in here because I need you all to relax and actually be receptive to all the other stuff I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Like it was just breaking the ice. I think it was
okay, good. Yeah.
It's not going to be, because you're going to be so focused on how serious this is.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I was wondering what you meant by receptive, because I think receptive could be different things. So I like the use of the vernacular icebreaker, So how does that work? In other words, before the joke is made, like what is wrong, for lack of a better term, or what is ineffective about the emotional state? And then how does the humor like create the proper state? That's really what I want to delve into for question 1.
This is tension.
So how does that help? How does the tension harm the learning, and how does the release of tension help the learning?
Because since the learning was so serious because they had to remember it for the transmission, that's what they were thinking about. So you're not going to necessarily like absorb all the information because you're just thinking about how important the information is. So then you're more nervous. And then if he starts off with a joke, that'll take your mind off the how important it is, and then you'll be more susceptible to learning it.
Okay, so but I'm a little confused because isn't if they are really concerned about how serious the learning is and how serious the stakes are, aren't they going to pay more attention?
I think that then then they're gonna be thinking about that and they're not gonna be thinking about the information.
Oh, I see.
They're
What you're saying.
thinking
Okay.
about having to
I see what you're
remember
saying.
the information.
Okay, in other words, like this is that the emotional focus is on the stakes themselves or the consequences, or like I better get this right. You know, it's kind of like a very very different form of this is like when students are so preoccupied with whether something is going to be on the test so they could write in their notes that they're not actually like involving their mind in the ideas. You know, I'm sure you've all either experienced that or witnessed that. You know, so yeah, the energy is all caught up in the serious mood itself or in the stakes itself, and it's not free to like be involved in learning. Yeah, okay, that's a good answer. Okay, so let's go on and start looking at the Mepharshim now. Some of these I'm quoting from the basically the Achronim. I'm quoting from summaries from the Mesivta, which is that edition of Shas that summarizes everything, because I don't have access to these Achronim. And then for the Rishonim, then I'm quoting them directly. So answer number one is from one of the Achronim, the Aruch Laner. So he says, simplest answer: the reason for the custom of the sages is to open with words of humor is in order to draw the hearts of students to Torah. Okay, so I feel like if Elisheva were here, she'd say it's conditioning. Okay, it's positive conditioning, right? And an example of this, which I don't know if I ever mentioned to you guys, this is the first example that came to my mind. Did I ever talk about how I love going to the dentist? Yeah, so I was saying yes. So if I haven't mentioned it before, is that when I was a kid, all throughout my childhood, the dentist office that we went to in the downstairs had an arcade, and it was a free arcade. Okay, like just arcade games, and like you could go there, and my mom would take me there a half an hour early to just let me play video games. And then I would go to the dentist, and then she would let me play video games usually for like 15 minutes afterwards. So I started creating this positive association of going to the dentist where like, you know, like I would be eager to go there because every time I went there, it would start off with like this video game experience, you know? And that was also in Atomic Habits. I think we talked about that also, that one of the tricks to starting a new habit is you make it appealing, you know, and you hook yourself into it. So this is the simplest explanation, is to draw students into Torah through pleasure, and like having a happy environment at the beginning of every shiur is something that like draws you in, you know? So that's the simplest explanation I've seen. Okay, I don't think there's that much to analyze here. Any questions on that?
Add on to that a bit.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Also, maybe like originally when you get into like Torah and when you like start learning, there's always like hesitation and like
that's good.
You're in conflict. So just like, but once you're in it, then you enjoy it, whatever. But like it's
Okay,
always
good.
like the beginning, which is conflict.
Yeah.
So this is making the
good.
beginning
That's
easier.
Great point, right? And it's also made in Atomic Habits that the first like minute or two of any habit, like exercising or whatever, is always the hardest to break through. And then once you get through that, then you're like, oh, it's not so bad, you know? But it's like starting to do it that's the bad thing. Same thing with like something's like starting to write a paper is the hardest thing, but once you're writing, then you're in it. So what I was saying is basically like you're smoothing out the transition from not learning to learning, and you're smoothing it out in a pleasant way. So it helps ease that transition and get you over that hump of resistance. That's a really good addition there. Okay, next one. So this is from the Sefer HaTanya, which is the founder of Chabad Hasidus, and then the Ma'or V'Shemesh. I don't know. It's another Hasidic Rav. I'm not sure which or Rebbe. Sorry, not Rav. Rebbe. I don't know which not branch of Hasidus, sect of Hasidus this is. Okay, so they say this is a very Hasidic answer. Shemitov Devar Hatzachos. Oh, I'll just read this in English. From the words of humor, a person will be stimulated to joy, and this is one of the fundamentals of a person's service of Hashem, that Torah and Tefillah should be out of joy. As it is stated, and this is in the Klalos, which I don't know if you did when you learned Devarim, that one of the things Hashem says Bnei Israel is going to receive curses for is if we don't serve Hashem out of joy. Therefore, Chazal said that a person shouldn't daven out of sadness or laziness, but out of a joy of a mitzvah. So this is a general thing that your avodas Hashem should be in a state of joy. Now, obviously here, we can analyze this a lot, and there are many, many reasons for this, but, and you see that this is not just about learning, and it's not even about learning halacha. This is saying that learning is an activity of avoda, and avodas Hashem should be in joy. So could we get like a basic idea? I know, again, it should be a whole shiur, but what's a basic idea of your avodas Hashem being with simcha? Or what would be lacking if your avodas Hashem is not in a state of simcha?
You're not like recognizing how much it benefits you.
Okay, good. So on a basic level, like if you were going to be doing something, like let's say you're getting your paycheck, okay, and like your boss hands you your paycheck and you are just like, like no flat affect, I would think that there's something wrong with the way that you're relating to getting paid, So true avodas Hashem, if you truly recognize that this is for your good, is like l'tov lach, like Moshe Rabbeinu says, then you would be happy about it. And sometimes, kind of like in my mind, the example of this is like a laugh track, like on like in the old TV shows, is that sometimes you need to like jumpstart the mood through artificial means in order to get you realize, oh, this really is funny, or like this really is like a good time. Or sometimes, let's say like if you are at like a party or someone is like, like on vacation and like you're tense, you need to like artificially get yourself into a happy mood so that you can recognize the natural good that you're about to receive, And if you didn't do that, you would be missing out on the benefit and the perfection, and you would also have a distorted way of relating to the nature of the activity, which is that this is for your benefit. Okay. Next answer. Anyone have anything to add to this?
I'm wondering if it's back to your comment which you made in the beginning, because
Sure.
they're all in the same room, and if you crack a joke and
Yeah.
you see one person laughing, even if you're not laughing, you're kind of like, oh, other people find this pleasant and humorous, like
Yeah.
that just like it's contagious. I mean, so the same way as laughter is contagious, like learning will be contagious because the whole
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually thought of I guess I forgot to add this as a point, okay? But when I was going over it, when I was preparing this, we had this idea that laughter is a unifying force, okay? And if you've ever been in a movie theater and watched a comedy movie in a movie theater versus a comedy movie by yourself, there's something like when everyone is laughing about this whole thing, then it unifies everybody. And in fact, I actually use this as a tool in my classroom management arsenal when I was my first year of teaching, when I was teaching the really, really unruly 10th grade boys. So at the very beginning, when I was a new teacher, they would like make a joke at the expense of like each other or of me, and like I would get all defensive and like feel like I had to control them, And then I realized that what the best way to respond to that is just make a better joke, and then they would all be laughing, and they'd be laughing like at my joke. So everyone would be unified in laughter, and it would be centered around me, and then I could harness their attention back, And so there's and like Ilana mentioned, like laughter is contagious. So like once you get everyone laughing, even the people who like wouldn't necessarily find it really funny, like it has this way of spreading, and then you like keep everyone unified, and that's very conducive to group learning because then everyone's like on the same team, everyone's working together, everyone is. That's another purpose of the icebreaker, I think, is that if you're in a social situation where people feel awkward and like are tending to withdraw, this makes everyone involved in something common that they can loosen up together. Okay. This next answer is stated in Kabbalistic terminology. My guess is because the person who said it was involved in Kabbalah, but we're going to translate it into more Chazal terminology. So Tiferes Yehonasan, I don't know who this is. He says, even though it is prohibited to engage in any mundane chatter at all, due to the exalted level of Jewish sanctity. Okay, so he's talking about like a high level of people, like we shouldn't be involved in any like mundane conversation. Okay, that's clearly like beyond the letter of the law. The sages established the practice of saying some words of humor before learning. This is addressing what Ayala was asking about, like what's the nature of this obligation. So he actually uses the word takana. I don't think this is actually a halakha, by the way, okay? Like that you have to make a joke, okay? But whatever. But here's his reasoning. Because in all mitzvot, one must give a small portion to the sitra achra. Now, the sitra achra, I believe, it's either a Zoharic term or a Lurianic term for what we would call the satan. Okay, so the satan, you have to give a small portion to the satan so that it doesn't prosecute the Jews. as we find that we are accustomed, this is a weird example he gives, in tefillin. Oh, I should have gotten my tefillin out to show you. Let's see. Okay, hold on a second here. Actually, I'm not gonna get it. It's gonna take too long. If next time you see like someone's tefillin, look up close. You'll see a few hairs sticking out of the tefillin, like hairs from the animal that the tefillin is, the cow that the tefillin is made out of. Apparently, that's a minhag in order to give a portion to the sitra achra. I don't know if that's just a kabbalistic. It's actually a halacha, or a minhag. But he's saying it's to like acknowledge that you have to give a portion to the Yetzer Hara. Okay. However, when it comes to learning Torah, typo there, the sitra achra has no portion or hold at all. Therefore, they established the practice of saying some humorous words before learning in order to give the sitra achra its portion before learning so that it doesn't come to prosecute during learning. So the summary here is you give a portion to the satan so that it doesn't prosecute during learning. Now, our challenge again is to so if you believe like in mystical forces and like you have to actually like give something to the forces of evil, so then you don't need to explain this, okay? But if we're understanding the satan the way that we've been understanding it this year in Yov, or based on what you've learned about Chazal, what do you think this is saying? We have to like decode this.
Get distracted now so you won't be distracted while you're learning.
Exactly, right? Is so that people have distractions and there's I think also because what Ayala mentioned, there's a certain resistance to learning. There is a phenomenon of like getting it out of your system and then like engaging in this for learning. And this happens if you've ever been in a class where like people get a case of the giggles and like everyone has the giggles. They're like, what's the best way to deal with it? You let it run its course, and then once you get it out of your system, then you can go back to learning. Another example of this that I use in my classroom management, which is slightly similar to the one I gave before, is that a big distracting factor is the first snow of the year when you're in a room with windows. So what'll happen usually is the teacher will be teaching, snow starts falling, then some kid notices it and like, oh, it's snowing, and everyone like freaks out, and then everyone's like all distracted and the teacher can't like, get back to them. I don't know if I ever did this in your class, but what I do is oftentimes I'm the first one to notice that it's snowing because I see the windows and like they're looking to the front. So like I will stop what I'm saying right in the middle, say, okay, we're going to take 60 seconds to ooh and ah and get excited about the snow. Go. And I'll set my watch alarm. Everyone will ooh and ah about like the snow. And then my watch alarm will go off and then we'll all like focus back. So if you control it, then it won't come out in an uncontrollable way. And that's why I think it's like giving a little bit to the satan, to the Yetzer Hara, so that you acknowledge it and then you give it its little like snack and then like you can get back to learning. Okay.
Well, so I was kind of just thinking about this right now, but like,
sure.
Like from a teacher's perspective, which I wouldn't really know so well, but I feel like a lot of times like their goal is kind of just like to control, like, and when they don't, like, it's like hard to like manage the classroom.
Right.
So like them like making a joke where like they can't really control, like when you make a joke, like you can't really control every single person. It's kind of like you're letting it be free. Like you're
that's good.
That like.
So you're saying it's for the benefit of the teacher as well?
Yeah. Like how could benefit both?
That's a good point. That is definitely a good point. Yeah, it's an obstacle of teaching when you feel like you have to control everything. So starting off in this state or creating a classroom environment where there's this like we're starting off on this foot where like there's like stuff that we can't control that actually gives you more control because then you're only focusing on controlling what you can control. Okay, this answer I understood the least, but there's a point in it that I think is worthy of consideration. Okay. The Pani Matbiros, I also don't know who that is, says, before learning, we begin with words of humor in order to stimulate joy so that the Shekhinah should dwell. As we have learned that two who sit and learn are, two who sit and are involved in Torah, the Shekhinah dwells among them. However, after the learning begins, one needs to sit in awe out of awe of the Shekhinah that dwells among them. So it's basically saying, so we've seen this before. We saw that in the Gemara right above about Nevuah, that in order to get the Shekhinah, like to get Nevuah, you need to be in a happy state. And I don't know if we've talked about this or if you've learned about this, that the Nevi'im would like play music to get themselves into the state of prophecy. But then once the Shekhinah is there, what does a Navi feel once they are experiencing Nevuah? What's the emotional state when you're getting Nevuah?
Fear, like
fear,
shaking,
terror, and dread, right? Yeah. So there's some idea of like when you are in the presence of you're with the Shekhinah, whether it's Nevuah or whether it's like the Nisim in Mitzrayim. That was another thing, is that the Klal Yisrael were in a state of fear, or whether it's like this type of Shekhinah where you're recognizing God's presence. So then there's two reactions. There's joy at being in God's presence, which is apparently needed in order to initiate it. But then once you realize you're in God's presence, then there's a feeling of yira. And you see this in the Rambam, because when he says Ahavas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, he defines Ahava, which is this positive, enjoyable state. And he says, but then immediately you recoil backwards and realize like how lowly and frail you are, you know? Or another example of this is David HaMelech says in one of the Psachim of Tehillim, Gilu Bira'ada, rejoice in trembling. And that's like the way that we're supposed to describe Simchas Yom Tov on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or on Rosh Hashanah, as opposed to other Yom Tovim. That on other Yom Tovim, it's pure Simcha, but on Rosh Hashanah, it's Simcha and trembling. So like there's this juxtaposition of these two emotions, because God's presence really should bring both out in you. And again, I don't actually think we have time to go into this, but I want to mention it because according to this, it's not because of the learning, it's because learning is a way of relating to God's presence, and God's presence is really what demands the joy and the fear. Okay, so there's more to think about here. I don't want to dwell on it. I actually predicted that we wouldn't end in time, so I chose my answer for number 5. Okay, and then we'll end and then we'll go on. So my answer is based on Rashi and the Meiri. So Rashi gives this slight comment here. Badchi Rabbanim, the Rabbanim would laugh. He says their hearts and minds would be opened by the joy. But Rashi doesn't explain himself, okay? The Meiri explains a little bit more. He says, even though it is proper for a person to be in a state of submissiveness and lowliness, it is also proper for him to set himself up in a state of joy to fulfill God's mitzvos and for the perfection he'll gain. That's like what Leah said, that this is good for you, so you should be happy in anticipation of it. For the Shekhinah doesn't dwell amid sadness. Now here's where he explains it. Because sadness blocks up the heart and closes off the avenues of readiness and preparation. Okay? Nor out of laziness and diligent understanding, but only out of the joy of the heart and upright temperaments. It was even the way of the sages in the gatherings to open up with humorous words. So he's still not explaining himself, but he's saying basically that if you are in a state of sadness, your heart / mind, remember Lev is heart or mind, is blocked off, and the avenues of readiness, the shvile hahakana, are blocked off. So I was trying to understand what that means, and I explained it based on a statement by Richard Feynman. Okay, Richard Feynman was a Nobel Prize winning physicist, grew up on Ayala Street in Far Rockaway. I pass by his house every day when I walk to yeshiva. This is from one of his books. He says he was basically he got into a situation where he was having a hard time like being involved in physics and like coming up with new discoveries. So then he says what broke him out of it. He says, then I had another thought. Physics disgusts me a little bit right now, but I used to enjoy doing physics. Why did I enjoy it? I used to play with it. I used to do whatever I felt like doing. It didn't have to do with whether it was important for the development of nuclear physics, but whether it was interesting and amusing for me to play with. When I was in high school, I'd see water running out of a faucet growing narrower and wonder if I could figure out what determines that curve. I found it was rather easy to do. I didn't have to do it. It wasn't important for the future of science. Somebody else had already done it. That didn't make any difference. I'd invent things and play with things for my own entertainment. And then one more phrase here, or excerpt. I've always played around. It's hard to explain it very well. When I was a kid, I had a laboratory, a Machshavah Lab. Although I'm now in theoretical work, I originally played experimentally. It's a bad term. I mean that I fooled about. I never did experiments in a scientific sense to find out something. I would make radios or try to make a photocell work. I had a spark plug from an old Ford car that I would set up and use to burn holes in paper or see what would happen when I tried to put a spark through a vacuum tube. But I never kept a notebook of things I did every day or made careful measurements. I wasn't that kind of scientist, so to speak. I was just playing like a child playing, but with different toys. So my theory is as follows, that in order to have the proper mentality for truth-seeking and creative discovery and intuition, you need to loosen your mind and be in a playful mood. And joking to start off Shiur is a way to do that. However, there's one difference between us and Feynman. Feynman didn't have to discover everything, okay? And there's no pressure. We do have a pressure of like keeping halacha, but I would say that our pressure is not as great as the time when Torah was being passed down by word of mouth. In other words, I think we are much closer to Feynman than he was. The difference is we are learning God's Torah, and that is a certain serious thing. And like the stakes still are high in the sense that we have to do truth, but we should we should have a playful attitude when approaching Torah. And when I discovered this initially, I realized that David HaMelech says this a lot in Tehillim. Okay, look at these excerpts from Tehillim, which I quoted in English because there's so many. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit over time because we started a little bit late. I play with your statutes. I will not forget your word. Indeed, your testimonies are my plaything and my counselors. I will play with your mitzvos that I love. The heart grew thick as fat, but as for me, your Torah is my plaything. May your mercies come upon me so that I live, for your Torah is my plaything. Had your Torah not been my plaything, I would have perished in affliction. Distress and anguish have overtaken me. Your mitzvos are my plaything. I crave your salvation, O Hashem, and your Torah is my plaything. So clearly, David Melch sounds a little bit like Richard Feynman here, that he was playing with Torah. And not only did David play with Torah, Hashem plays with Torah. Okay, how so? In Mishlei, it says, he's talking about Chachma. So Hashem said, Shlomo says, Hashem made me Chachma as the beginning of his way before his deeds of yore. I was then his nursling. I was then his delightful plaything every day, playing before him at all times, playing in the inhabited areas of his earth, delightfully playing with the sons of man. So summary here, and this is the last opinion we'll go over in the official shiur, is Meiri and Rashi say it's to open the heart and the mind, which you could learn the way that Ilana was saying it about like an icebreaker, or to create a sense of togetherness. My understanding is, based on Feynman, is that a playful mood is conducive to creativity and truth-seeking and intuition. And if you think about it, I don't know if you know people like this, but there are people who are very, very brilliant thinkers, but they also have a very quick sense of humor. And you could tell that there's some relationship between the quickness of thinking in the learning and the quickness of thinking in humor. I don't have a scientific study to back this up, but like, I feel like there is, humor is associative and like making connections and being, like finding clever ways to juxtapose things or derive things. And humor follows those same things. So it's almost like you start off in this mode to put yourself in this mentality and to it's almost like stretching before you exercise, to like open these avenues of thought, So that's the official end of shiur. If you have to go, you can go. But I just have 2 more quick ideas, and then we could have questions here. This one I included, although I don't understand. Okay, but again, I included it because I think there's something here. This is the Maharal, and the Maharal is notorious for being hard to translate. Okay, so I did my best here. The Torah, which is God-given, only attaches to that which is perfected and not that which is deficient. And he used the word shalem here. The Torah, I'm actually going to read it in English, in Hebrew here. HaTorah hi sichlis. Torah is rational or intellectual. Shehu shlemus, which is perfection. V'hi chibur el haseichel rak kasher hamakabel b'shlemus az efshar lo l'kabel haseichel v'lo zulazeh. And therefore, the Torah, which is rationality, can only attach to the recipient when the person is in the proper state of perfection to receive it. Okay, so I don't know exactly what he means, but the sense I'm getting is, when is the human being in a state of perfection? When it's not only your mind that's involved, but when your emotions are in their primary state also. So if your emotions are angry or sad or depressed or distracted, and your mind is receptive, the Torah is only going to reach your mind, and it's not going to reach your entire being. But if you get your emotions on board, then the Torah will affect your entire being. And getting your emotions on board makes them, you do that by getting them positively disposed towards the activity you're going to be involved in. So I think he's learning it as receptive in the sense of like a full involvement of the self. And one of the best ways to do that is through putting yourself in simcha that's directed at something, and then joking as a way to awaken that. So that's, the Torah will only attach to that which is perfected or shalem, and a person isn't shalem without simcha. And then the last theory, which I did not quote directly, is Rabbi Moskowitz's theory. This is my Mishlei Rebbe. So he was not explaining the Gemara. Okay, so he always had an environment of banter in his class, where like the teacher is making fun of like not making fun of it in an aggressive way, but like jokes about the students, and like the students are making jokes about the teacher, teachers are making jokes about themselves, students are making jokes about themselves. I feel like we kind of have that sometimes also, So Rabbi Moskowitz has an interesting psychological theory, which is, he said, it's a healthy outlet for aggression. Okay, that Freud had a theory that, and I know Rabbi Moskowitz's was based on Freud. Freud had a theory that all jokes ultimately stem down to aggression, an aggressive outlet or a sexual outlet. Okay, that's Freud's theory. But Rabbi Moskowitz said, specifically in the context of a teacher-student relationship, there's always some aggression towards the teacher, whether it's because they're an authority figure or because like they're revealing truth, and like the truth is oppressive in the sense that now you have to change your life, or like a competition, So Ryan Moskowitz said that like if you create this environment of banter and the teachers making fun of themselves and like the students can make fun of the teacher and back and forth, it's like a healthy way to outlet that aggression, which is good for the learning, because if you didn't have a healthy way to outlet the aggression, then there would be real conflict or it would come out in some harmful way, So that's Ryan Moskowitz's theory. Not exactly our Gemara, because Gemara says that it should be at the beginning of the thing and not throughout. But that's Ryan Moskowitz's idea. So just to go back and just to formulate takeaways here, I'm not going to actually type the takeaways. Let's just formulate verbal takeaways. Is I think takeaway number one is the practical takeaway, which is whatever you say the reason is, it seems to be a positive thing to start off in a happy mood, a laughing mood through jokes, and then also realize the seriousness of what you're doing and not let it become too casual, okay? And the purpose of the seriousness is because there are high stakes. In the time of Shas, it was because the Masorah was dependent on you accurately transmitting the information. But now the high stakes are learning the right halacha, taking the subject matter seriously, investing yourself with all of your energy into finding what the truth is. But there should be a healthy balance between the two. And I think practically speaking, even though the minhag was to start off with jokes and like then get serious, I think that, again, times are different now, and each Rebbe and each student needs to find the balance that is going to be right for them. For example, let's take like the Aruch HaNer's thing to draw students into Torah. Let's say you're doing Kiruv, like you might need to like incorporate a lot more comedy, because maybe the thing that's going to get students to keep coming back is, oh, this teacher's hilarious. Like we should go to this teacher, And like for that person, starting off with a joke and then becoming dead serious, that's like not going to be effective, For some people, like again, in high school classes, like I think just keeping a happy environment is a very important thing, because a lot of classes are really, really boring or sad, So like it's good for general like attitude towards Torah. So I think that there should be a certain looseness in how we apply these things nowadays, and not necessarily as rigid as Gemara would seem. And again, that's why I'm not poskening. I'm just saying like based on my understanding of what's effective as a teacher. Okay, that's all I have for today. But like questions and comments as usual.
Thank you. Or great Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos.
I have a question. Well,
Sure.
actually, a question and a comment.
Sure.
So first of all, the comment on Richard Feynman, of course, the name of his autobiography was "You're Surely Joking."
Right, that's true. That's a good point, right? Yeah.
Which is why the whole like tone is almost set up from the title of this very jokey book by this very serious guy not taking himself too seriously.
Right, and you're right that the whole book is filled with examples of him doing pranks and like being joking about people and like laughing at himself.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one thing. And the other thing, this is a number 4. This the Shechina dwelling.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if it's just a matter of like setting up your environment, and by that I mean almost like physical environment.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like with the Mishkan, you needed to have a certain place with various set of particulars, but it also had to be like beautiful, and it had to be inspiring to people. Or like for davening, like it's much, like one of the halachas of davening in front of a window,
right?
Having like a vista or being in a beautiful place, or so I'm wondering if it's more, this whole dwelling of Shechina is more like literally just set up your hall in a way that people are like you're almost like sitting in a more loosened up way.
Yeah, that fits in very well with that first part of the Gemara, that it identifies the like 5 or 6 types of activities and moods that you have to like clear out of the space, and then what the positive mood has to be. It's like mood lighting, only it's just mood, mood cultivation, to make the Shechina dwell. And like, I think it's a good analogy that like, yeah, with tefillah you have physical setups, but with learning, it's psychological setups to like get ourselves into a certain mode to be receptive for the Shechina. Yeah, that's a good comparison.
No, but I'm wondering if it's also physical, because if you're like, I mean, they were,
I mean, because you're actually like literally physically like.
No, because it's like, I think, was it like that the Rebbe was sitting and the students were standing when they were learning, or something,
right.
Like something physical there. So I'm thinking, if somebody cracks a joke and you're like laughing, like your body actually ends up moving around in a different, like you become more comfortable in your actual physical posture.
Right, that's true. Yeah. The students did have to have a certain posture in front of their Rav, and like I think it did change at one point. Like the students had to stand, and then they changed it to they could sit. But you still can't like be totally relaxed in front of your Rav, because that's considered a too casual. So yeah, yeah, it'd be interesting to look at this in the context of other halachos about the setting that learning should take place in, which I did not do when I prepared this.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's anybody else? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbat.